Welcome. Today I'd like to talk about the status of data at Catholic Charities Fort Worth late 2017, early 2018. What are we trying to do with data? We're really just trying to learn how to be better and better at what we do. So studying information about what we do and what works and what doesn't should help us get better over time. A fancy way of saying all that is we're trying to become an analytics-empowered organization. So what does an analytics-empowered organization look like? Well, there are three primary ingredients of an analytics-empowered organization. Number one, you have to have good data. Number two, you have to have good processes. And number three, you have to have good technology. Well, in terms of on the technology front, we've got pretty darn good technology, and or we have access to good technology, and Catholic Charities is really dedicated to doing whatever it takes to get our hands on that good technology. So I'd say we've got that lined up pretty good. We do not have good data, nor do we have good processes. When I say processes, I'm not talking about how we execute our other jobs outside of IT. I'm really just talking about the processes for collecting, storing, and valuing data. So what's wrong with the data and processes here at Catholic Charities? Well, first off, there's virtually no strategic framework for data. Our development in Salesforce thus far been program-centric, it's been organic and reactionary. And while that's really allowed us to be agile and nimble as we change things over time, it leaves this information footprint that is just, it's all over the place. And program information information from one program doesn't talk to information from another program, so you can't get an enterprise view, even though we're talking about the same clients. You can't even, in a lot of cases, you can't even do accurate program-specific reporting and analytics because of this next point, which is there's very little standardization, minimal governance. So it's just inconsistencies, and things don't follow a plan for laying the type of footprint where you can actually go back in and effectively analyze what's going on. So ask yourself what the most valuable data that we capture here at Catholic Charities. I think there's a really good case to be had that the most valuable data we have is actually in ad hoc handwritten narratives, things like case notes, things like service planning. Those things are handwritten. They're open-ended, and there's just really little machine discernible information. Technology is making lots of strides in text analysis and things like that, but it is not to the level where you can really make true, in-depth sense of it. To do meaningful analytics, just think about trying to associate a sense of scale and value or context in a 300-word paragraph about what went on with the client today. But that's where all the good information is. So I think what I'm saying here is that we have a data problem, not an analytics problem. Yes, we do have an analytics problem, but it's largely because we have a data problem first. The second thing is that we need to figure out a way to unlock the value in that personalized case manager narrative without over-regulating the narrative itself. In other words, if we hang our hat on the client-driven case management strategy, that can't become subservient to capturing meaningful data. I think it's going to be really challenging to do that. I think it's going to require fresh outside-of-the-box thinking. To my knowledge, no one else has solved for this problem. Definitely ETO hasn't, and none of the other players in this space have either, to my knowledge. So I think we need to just get this conversation started, ticking away at it incrementally. So we're going to go over a couple ideas of how to make some incremental progress here. First, I'd like to start talking about one aspect of the personalized case manager narrative, and that's service planning. And that's where you set goals and action steps. And the reason we want to do that is, first off, it's one of the most unstructured, unregulated, and non-standardized data capture areas in all of Salesforce. I'm going to give you a couple examples of what I'm talking about. So these are real examples taken directly from Salesforce. This is a really great SMART goal. SMART goal is specific, measurable, achievable, results focused, and time bound, I think. This is really a good one. Save $10,000 by end of year. There's some stuff in there about, punctuation and stuff that might be a little hard to discern, but that's a really great SMART goal that we could mine and figure out, give it some weight, some value. But the same person who wrote that goal also wrote this goal, emergency. It was deemed in the financial domain, so that gives me some kind of context, but I have no way of knowing, even as a person, I have no way of knowing if an emergency came up and they need to handle it, or if they're saving for an emergency or whatever. So, you can see that's a pretty big leap from a SMART goal to a very vague, not even really a goal, just a one word, emergency. It's not the same person, but another person on that team just in the same month wrote this goal. It literally says A. Pretty sure that there's no one who really, I'm sure there's a typo, but this is the kind of information we're dealing with just in goals. So it is completely open, Wild West, and it would be not just a daunting task. I think it's a pretty impossible task to have a machine make sense of this information. So the second reason is the way we're currently doing it, the interface, is actually limiting our ability somewhat to advance or change, to add some features that have been requested. There's a couple projects that have gone on and been put on hold several times because of the way that the service planning thing is organized and implemented. And the last thing is, if we can actually start making some sense and capturing good data in our goals and action plan setups, and this overall service planning, it would be huge to the analytics. If I could really look and see, what are we trying to do? Did they do it? That is really, really big. And compare that to things like our financial progression metrics and that kind of stuff, and you see, what did we do compared to whether or not they were moved out of poverty or something like that. So it's potentially very, very valuable to know that. So an idea here is using assessments to help drive the creation of better or more measurable goals and action plans. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. So this is a copy of what's called the Strengths Finder assessment. It's developed for Padua. And basically what it does is has 4 different domains. You can see here we have well-being. Let me zoom in here. You have well-being down here at the bottom. And then we have a support area, which is kind of infrastructure and things that the client relies on. We have education and vocation. And then we have financial freedom. And you can tell by the way everything's laid out, you've got a progression, you've got a potential progression going this way and this way. So from left to right, zoom back in here on the top, we have opportunities, preparation, stability, thriving. So if a person were to take this assessment and just have to identify per row which one of these cells they identify with, gives some kind of view of where they stand. So you have questions like, in the support area, my family, do they identify with, I would like to address household members' needs that limit our family's potential? It's obviously an opportunity for them. All the way to knows household members have needs that limit the potential, or needs are confidently being addressed with a plan for the future. You can see that the progression is left to right. The other really cool thing about this is that it's arranged in a similar manner to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where the more basic things, our foundational things, are here at the bottom, and the more self-actualization things are up here at the top. And so the idea is that these sections here hold more weight. They are more fundamental than these up here. And again, you got the left to right action. So if we were able to have this assessment, and our clients take this assessment in general, and we were to engage in long-term strategies, generally speaking, we would like to see them progress. If they're over here, we want to see them moving this way, left to right, bottom to top. So let's talk about how we could turn this into something that would mean a lot from the data side. Like I said, these down here are they're heavier than these up here, and so they're more important. So if we just had something that described this from a data side, and then we could associate goals with each one of these things that made sense. I'll give you a couple examples. If somebody were to ask or answer, identify on the under my well-being and the physical and mental health side, if they were to identify as experiencing issues or a condition that strongly limits me and or my work, school, family life, if they answered that, I think a reasonable goal for that would be to address physical or emotional needs. It's pretty generic sounding, but it addresses this particular cell. Let's do another one real quick. If somebody answered, I'm interested in receiving additional education or training so I can pursue the job I would like, I would think a reasonable goal for that would be to make a plan to get the education or training I need for the job I want. So you can see what I'm doing here is just making a goal that's associated with each one of these things. And so what that does is if this assessment covered everything that we do, and we're studying that right now, and we had a goal that was associated with each one of these sections, then we could have some weighting going on. We could know where a client is in terms of their needs. So take that concept. Let's put that concept to work. So this is an example of an assessment that's been filled out for our fictitious person, Jill Smith, at the beginning of December. And she went through and identified where she stood on each one of these rows. And you can see, as we were talking earlier, she's got some fundamental issues going on here at the bottom, and it's probably not, won't do us much good to start to think about getting her out of poverty until we address some of these issues. So if the case manager were to use this assessment to help drive the conversation with the client, they'd likely focus on the more fundamental ones at the bottom here. Maybe ask the client, why did you answer, I experience issues or a condition that sometimes limits me and or my work, school, family life. Hopefully that drives a conversation and the request to, they work together to set a goal. If the question is, what's going on here, and the client responds that she's depressed, then I would expect that the case manager would probably or want to set a goal that has to do with dealing with depression. So now let's think about how we would pull that off and how we could capture meaningful data about that. So throw out all notions of what Salesforce currently is, and we're just going to think completely outside the box and totally don't think about the restraints of our current implementation. So in whatever system we have, no matter what it looks like, we're probably going to have a way to create a goal. So I'm going to go ahead and have a new goal button here for placeholder as now. So let's click that new goal button. First thing we need to know from a data side is, what domain are we talking about? What is this goal related to? And in this case, we're talking about this mental health need down here. It's in the well-being section. So let's select well-being. And then what's the actual goal? She told us that we need to address her depression. It's her mental health needs. This group of values here is obviously dependent upon or informed by the domain that we select here. So these values would be specific to our domain. In this case, we're going to select address mental health needs. At this point in time, just by adding those two little drop-down menus, from a data perspective, I know exactly where this lines up here. I know that it's like plain Battleship. I just went to right there. I know exactly what we're talking about. And if I've done the proper work on the backside, we know how heavy that goal is, and we know that it's addressing something that needs to be addressed as opposed to maintaining it. And we know that it's really low on the hierarchy needs of basic needs. At this point, from a data perspective, I don't care what you put in here. The case manager can put anything. This could and should be the language of the client so that it works best for them. This could be, in this case, probably deal with depression. But it could also be the letter A. Doesn't really matter. I have, again, from a data perspective, everything that I need. Hopefully it would be something to deal with depression and a target date. So let's keep going with this proposed interface. Let's go ahead and save that goal. And now we have a goal out there of dealing with depression. You can see that no longer do you have to think about what the drop-down lists, the two that we just did to identify the goal. That's all in the background. At this point, we have the language of the client, whatever it is that best communicates what that goal is. So now we need to figure out how we can reach this goal. So we ask the client, how do you want to deal with this? How do you want to reach this goal? And she responds that she'd like for the case manager to help her find a counselor. So let's add a step to indicate that. First question is, who is going to be doing this? She said she would like for the case manager to do it. So the case manager selects case manager. And then we're asking, what are they going to do? And this list may look a little bit odd at first until you really think about what we're asking. Here's how we came up with this list. The question again is, what is this person going to do? What is the who going to do? What is case manager going to do? What we did is we studied over 5,500 action steps and tried to figure out, if using text analytics and so forth, what is actually going on there. And we were able to whittle it down to this list that pretty much everything that we saw in the data could be put into this list here. They're either identifying a resource, and this could be case manager and or the client, identifying a resource, selecting a resource, engaging a resource, performing a task, removing a barrier, referring, practicing a behavior, or following up. Pretty much, like I said, we've 5,500 action steps where we did an analysis of and kind of rolled it up. And then we took two Padua cases, one of them that had over 200 action steps and one of them that had in the high hundreds, and took every single one and meticulously went down one by one and said, what is really going on here? And can we classify each activity into one of these buckets? And we were able to do so. I do realize that we probably have missed something, so I definitely want to have the other here, but there would probably be some type of governance process we would do to get something added to the list. Maybe a coaching opportunity if somebody said, hey, my client said, or what we need to do doesn't fit in this, specify other, it makes it on there, and we could vet it and add it to this list. In the meantime, this sits in pretty well, right? We're identifying the resource. She wants us to find her a counselor. So I'm going to select that. Now, again, just like on the goal setting, from a data perspective, I'm all good now. I know who's doing it and I know what they're doing. And so as we fill out the rest of this stuff, we'll be able to see if that was achieved or not. Again, the details section can be whatever language works for the client and or the case manager. It's not important on a true analytics level, or at least at this stage, what this part says. If this had been a doctor that they needed, the data would think of it more or less the same as case manager identifying a resource, and then the person could write in find doctors. But it still looks the same to me. From the data perspective. So in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and pretend that we've done this, built this thing out for how to deal with depression, action steps that we can take to deal with depression for this particular goal. So you can see case manager, we're identifying resources, finding counselors. The client is then going to select a counselor. So there's select resources, resource. The client is also going to attend weekly counseling sessions. And the case manager is going to check in via phone to see how things are going periodically. Again, this is so clean and so it has a value behind the scenes. I have a value, and I also know how it relates to the goal and where that goal stands. This is data goodness here. The rest of what I want to talk about for goals and action plans really are just about the user interface. There are things that will help facilitate capture of good data, as well as give visibility and empower the users to take advantage of the data that is there. Really simple things too. Some of them, like for example, if we see that this is a follow-up, the user shouldn't have to keep adding new ones and retyping that, basically reinventing the wheel every time. They should be able to click a single button, get a new follow-up that increments on some kind of predetermined value. That seems like an easy thing, but right now it's one of those things that people have to manually type and just doesn't seem, it seems like an easy problem to solve. The bigger ones, though, have to do with modern user interface concepts, the things that people are already used to on their smartphones, on really good websites, on their tablets, things that are just completely missing from the environment that our users are used to working with in Salesforce. I'll show you a few of them here. Let's pretend that we were working still with the same person and we had already gone through, we established another goal. We determined that this person would like to get a job. So we went the process that we went through earlier. We created the obtain employment goal and the associated action steps. If during our conversations with the client said, you know, one of the reasons during my counseling sessions, I figured out one of the main reasons I am depressed is that I don't have a job. So can we please prioritize the obtain employment goal? Well, seems to me like it would be very valuable to be able to reduce the noise by, if we wanted to focus on the obtain employment goal, which was created after the deal with depression goal, we should be able to remove the noise by just collapsing this like you do on your smartphone or even in Excel sometimes, to depress that, get that noise out of the way. If we need to put this goal on hold, let's do that, be able to do that with one click, be able for it visually to be represented that it's on hold. This is something that's just not there at all in Salesforce right now. Other things too, to really take it to the next level, but again, it's a common thing that you see in modern user interfaces, is the ability to rearrange things, be able to click here, drag this up here, and we've rearranged it. So now anybody who navigates to this screen can easily see that we have a deal with depression goal that's been put on hold, and we have a priority goal here of obtain employment. And you don't have to guess what's going on. You don't have to read a whole bunch of things. Just visually, this tells a story that's not being told in the user interface right now in Salesforce. In summary, it's an incremental starting point for addressing data issues, and I got to stress this is an incremental thing. These are incremental things to do, but we'd like to start using assessments to drive the creation of goals and action steps that are both smart and that can be categorized and that can be weighted and measured, that have clearly defined meaning and have a known relationship to our mission. Those things right there, from a data perspective, give us some momentum on trying to figure out our efficacy in what we're doing. And the second thing is to streamline the user interface to facilitate and encourage the capture of meaningful data. There's a whole lot more stuff to do, but that gets us kind of headed in the right direction. We're continuing to do more studies and make more recommendations, both operationally and from the reporting side. So stay tuned for more.